The 1980s gave us some of the most shocking horror cinema ever made. We're talking blood, guts, and chaos that made audiences scream, not from fear, but from outrage. Some of these movies sparked protests, police raids, and emergency censorship meetings. Theaters yanked them mid-run, sometimes after just a single showing. What made these movies so dangerous that they couldn't stay on screens? Let's find out. When Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust premiered in Milan in February 1980, it didn't just shock audiences, it got the director arrested for murder. The Italian found footage film follows a documentary crew who disappear in the Amazon rainforest, leaving behind disturbing footage of their final days. The film's realistic violence was so convincing that Italian authorities actually believed Deodato had killed his actors on camera. He had to bring the cast to court to prove they were alive, and even then, the film was immediately banned. The UK placed it on the infamous Video Nasties list, where it stayed banned for years. Australia, Norway, and Germany followed suit. Even after the murder charges were dropped, Deodato faced obscenity charges that dragged through Italian courts. The film's reputation spread through whispers and bootleg VHS tapes passed between hardcore horror fans. Critics called it unwatchable. Theaters across Europe pulled it within days of opening. What started as an exploitation film became a genuine legal nightmare that helped change how governments approached horror cinema. Few horror movies triggered backlash quite like Silent Night, Deadly Night. The slasher about a killer dressed as Santa Claus opened in November 1984, and TriStar Pictures had no idea what was coming. Parents' groups erupted. The PTA organized protests outside theaters. Siskel and Ebert dedicated an entire segment to condemning it on national television, reading the names of executives involved in making it. Large theater chains like National Amusements pulled the film after just a week. The controversy centered on the poster showing Santa holding an axe, with the tagline suggesting he'd been naughty. For parents trying to preserve Christmas magic for their kids, this felt like an attack. TriStar yanked the film from wide release within days, making it one of the fastest theatrical pulls in horror history. What's wild is the film itself wasn't particularly extreme by 1984 standards. It was standard slasher fare. But putting Santa in a killer's role crossed a cultural line nobody had tested before. The film later found success on home video, but its theatrical run remains one of the most notorious examples of mainstream panic over a horror film. Sam Raimi's directorial debut became a cult masterpiece, but its initial theatrical run was rocky. When The Evil Dead opened in 1981, Raimi was just 22, working with a tiny budget and unknown actors. The film's relentless gore and demonic possession scenes caught censors completely off guard. In the UK, it landed on the Video Nasties list, alongside genuinely extreme exploitation films, which baffled fans who recognized Raimi's innovative camera work and dark humor. Several American theaters pulled the film after complaints from local groups who objected to the intensity. The famous tree attack scene became particularly controversial, with some regions demanding cuts before they'd allow screenings. What censors missed was the craftsmanship. Raimi mounted cameras on planks, dragged them through mud, and created shots nobody had seen before. Bruce Campbell's performance as Ash, covered in blood and fighting for survival, would later make him a horror icon. But in 1981, all people saw was the raw violence. The movie stayed banned in several countries for years, turning it into forbidden fruit that horror fans desperately sought out through underground channels. Dario Argento's Tenebrae arrived during the height of the Video Nasties panic in the UK, and it didn't stand a chance. The Italian giallo follows a mystery writer stalked by a killer who's imitating murders from his novels. Argento's trademark style, vivid colors, brutal kills, and an almost dreamlike visual approach, made censors deeply uncomfortable. British authorities banned it outright in 1982, and it stayed banned for nearly 2 decades. The film faced censorship across Europe, with many countries demanding significant cuts to the murder sequences. Argento himself called it his most violent film to date, which didn't help its case with nervous distributors. Several American theaters dropped it after brief runs, spooked by the growing moral panic around violent cinema. The film's razor murder scene became particularly notorious, studied by censorship boards as an example of excessive violence. What got lost in the controversy was Argento's commentary on the relationship between art and violence, but nobody wanted to hear that argument in 1982. The film only reached wider audiences decades later, after home video had changed the landscape entirely. Andrzej Żuławski's Possession might be the most genuinely disturbing film on this list, and theaters worldwide couldn't handle it. The film stars Isabelle Adjani and Sam Neill as a couple whose divorce spirals into complete psychological collapse, with Adjani's character having an affair with a grotesque creature. When it premiered at Cannes in 1981, audience members reportedly walked out in droves. The infamous subway scene, where Adjani suffers a visceral breakdown involving bodily fluids and hysterical screaming, became the moment where most viewers reached their limit. Distributors pulled the film from theaters across the UK and United States, often after just a few showings. The British Censor Board placed it on the Video Nasties list, calling it psychologically harmful. Żuławski had made the film during his own painful divorce, and that raw, emotional truth translated into scenes that felt less like horror and more like watching someone's actual mental breakdown. Adjani won Best Actress at Cannes for the performance, the same performance that got the film banned in multiple countries. The creature effects by Carlo Rambaldi added body horror to the psychological terror, creating something that didn't fit any category censors understood. Today, film schools study Adjani's performance and Żuławski's direction. In 1981, theaters just wanted it gone. Lucio Fulci's The Beyond took Italian horror's dreamlike approach and pushed it past the breaking point. The movie follows a woman who inherits a Louisiana hotel built over one of the 7 gates of hell, unleashing surreal nightmares involving acid-melted faces, eye trauma, and flesh-eating spiders. Fulci wasn't interested in coherent plotting. He wanted to assault the senses, and he succeeded. American theaters that initially booked it pulled the movie quickly, with many citing audience complaints about the graphic violence. Fulci's approach to gore was almost clinical. He held shots longer than any American horror director would dare, forcing viewers to really see the destruction of human bodies. The film's lack of traditional narrative structure confused and frustrated audiences expecting a normal horror story. Germany, Australia, and several other countries banned it outright, or demanded such heavy cuts that distribution became impossible. What was meant to be a gothic nightmare became a censorship nightmare instead. Decades later, The Beyond developed a devoted following who appreciated Fulci's uncompromising vision, but its original theatrical run was a disaster. The Burning arrived during the summer camp slasher boom following Friday the 13th, but its extreme violence got it bounced from theaters fast. The film follows a hideously burned janitor seeking revenge at a summer camp, with gore effects by Tom Savini that pushed boundaries even for 1981. The infamous raft massacre scene showed Savini at his most creative and brutal, with multiple teenagers killed in rapid succession using garden shears. The UK banned it as a video nasty, and several US theater chains pulled it after parents' groups protested. The film had launched the careers of Jason Alexander, Fisher Stevens, and Holly Hunter, but nobody noticed because they were too busy arguing about the violence. Miramax had produced it as one of their first films, and the controversy taught them valuable lessons about marketing extreme content. Some regions kept the film in theaters but demanded cuts that neutered Savini's effects work entirely. The irony is that The Burning was actually trying to say something about revenge and bullying. It just wrapped that message in so much blood that the message got lost. Lucio Fulci's second entry on this list might be his most controversial. The New York Ripper is a brutal serial killer film set in Manhattan, featuring a murderer who quacks like a duck while killing women in increasingly graphic ways. The duck voice was Fulci's bizarre creative choice that made the film feel even more unhinged. British censors banned it instantly, citing extreme violence against women. Several European countries followed suit, and American distribution was minimal. The few US theaters that booked it pulled the film within days after intense criticism. Women's groups protested the graphic nature of the murders, which they saw as misogynistic exploitation. Fulci defended the film as a commentary on urban violence and moral decay, but nobody wanted to hear it. The killer's identity and motivation, revealed in the final act, added a layer of psychosexual commentary that made censors even more uncomfortable. Germany seized copies and destroyed them. The film remained virtually impossible to see legally for decades, existing mainly through bootleg copies traded among hardcore giallo fans who appreciated Fulci's grimy vision of New York City as a diseased nightmare. Mausoleum is a possessed woman movie that mixed demonic horror with excessive gore, and its 1983 theatrical run was brief. The story involves a woman possessed by a demon that causes her to murder people in graphic fashion, with practical effects that pushed the limits of early 80s gore technology. Regional censors across the Bible Belt pulled the movie immediately, citing obscenity. Even theaters in major cities cut their runs short after complaints about the sexual violence and demonic imagery. The movie had a tiny budget and limited distribution to begin with, so when controversy hit, it vanished fast. Director Michael Dugan had wanted to create a female-centered horror film, but the execution leaned so heavily into exploitation that the feminist angle got buried. Various countries banned it or demanded cuts that removed the film's most memorable moments. It became a footnote in the 80s horror history, remembered mainly by fans who caught it during its brief time in grindhouse theaters. Uli Lommel's The Boogeyman mixed slasher elements with supernatural horror, and British censors hated it. The movie involves a haunted mirror that causes violent deaths, with graphic kills that felt excessive for 1980. When it reached UK shores, authorities immediately added it to the video Nasties list, where it stayed banned for years. The film's use of glass shards as murder weapons, including an infamous scene involving a mirror shard through a throat, became a focal point for censorship debates. Several American theater chains dropped the movie mid-run after local protests, particularly in conservative regions. It had found an audience in urban grindhouse theaters, but mainstream venues wanted nothing to do with it. Lommel later claimed censors had missed the point. He was making a commentary on how violence reflects back on viewers, using the mirror as a metaphor. But the video Nasties panic wasn't interested in metaphors. The movie spawned sequels that went straight to video, as theatrical distribution had become impossible. Like many films caught in the early 80s moral panic, The Boogeyman's reputation as forbidden content outlived its actual impact.